Curious Naked Diatribes. Curious Naked Diatribes. Curious Naked Diatribes.
There's no apology to be made. None.
There's no apology to be made. None. There's no apology to be made.
Before I begin, I'd like to issue a content warning. This episode contains a brief depiction of suicide. Greetings and blessings, and welcome back to Curious Naked Diatribes. As some of you may remember from my previous episode on WINSEC, or the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, I talked a bit about Roy Bourgeois, the founder of School of the Americas Watch, about how he and others like him who had also served in the military, at some point had an experience, some shift in conscience that made them take a different view of the violence they were part of. So I'd like to begin this episode on the ongoing genocide Israel is continuing by talking about another young man who served in the military. Aaron Bushnell was a 25-year-old serving in the Air Force. On 25 February 2024, Bushnell began live streaming a video near the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. He said in the video, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest. But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, is not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal." Bushnell then continued to the embassy gates, set the camera down, poured a flammable liquid on himself, and lit the flames. And through those flames came his final chant, "Free Palestine." Myself and many others like me are still reeling from this news. Some of us can understand the outrage over what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza, which is exactly as Bushnell characterized it, a genocide. We can understand the outrage, even if we can't understand how someone so young would want to end their life. So I'm dedicating this episode to Aaron Bushnell, so that his final act of protest will not be forgotten. I see it now as a duty to continue these podcasts, as my small part of the work to be done, to honor the life of Aaron Bushnell, to honor the lives of Palestinian men, women, and children, and to end this horror, and to help others understand the different dimensions of it, even as I struggle to understand it myself. Now, obviously, I won't be able to fit everything into a single episode, so I'll try to put it together piece by piece. Recently, the U.S. used its veto power as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to block a resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. So we have the Palestinian Health Ministry reporting over 29,000 fatalities since October 7th, 29,000, and more than 67,000 injuries. There are thousands more still missing under the rubble of destroyed buildings. And remember that amid the bombing of the hospitals, the killing of doctors who are already inundated with the dying and wounded, working in the poorest conditions imaginable, amid all this carnage and chaos, it's difficult for humanitarian aid to get through. Food, and some aid organizations have stopped trying. People are literally starving, and the U.S. vetoes a ceasefire. This is now the third time the U.S. has done this since October 7th of last year. You may remember from my last episode on Israel-Palestine that the U.S. had done the same thing. So you have aid orgs trying to get food through, but they can't because of the bombing. And the U.S. blocking a humanitarian ceasefire 3 times. Now, before I continue, I'll give you a quick sketch of the UN Security Council, because I realize that many of you, like myself, are trying to figure out just what the hell the UN even does and how it affects Israel's ability or inability to carry out genocide, it can be overwhelming. So I'll try my best to break it down. I may even have to do a separate episode on this. So the UN Security Council has 15 members, 5 of which are permanent members: China, France, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, and the United States. The other 10 members have 2-year terms which are voted on by the General Assembly. If any one of the permanent members of the Security Council votes down a resolution, regardless of how many other member countries vote for it, the resolution doesn't pass. And so the US has used its veto power to the hilt in order to block the international community, especially when it comes to the defense of Israel. According to Electronic Intifada, while it vetoed the draft resolution on Tuesday, the U.S. is pushing its own initiative at the Security Council that would link a temporary ceasefire to the release of Israelis and foreign nationals held in Gaza since 7 October. The article continues, Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, argued that a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire would, quote, put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, referring to between Israel, the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt, aimed at securing the release of the remaining Israelis and foreign nationals held in Gaza since 7 October. What kind of sensitive negotiations can only take place while bombs are dropping, I'd like to know. So the U.S. is trying to make it all about the hostages held by Hamas, and even if that were the case, all that shows is how the U.S., and of course Israel, doesn't value the lives of Palestinian civilians, thinks they're animals. Some of the things you'll find Israeli soldiers, Israeli officials talk openly about, even bragging about on television and on social media, is absolutely disgusting. So I'm not even going to repeat it here. So it seems clear to me that the U.S. is simply using its veto power in the UN Security Council to provide cover and buy more time for Israel to continue its genocide. So let's talk more about that cozy relationship between the U.S. and Israel. If you've forgotten just how committed Joe Biden, Genocide Joe, is to Zionism and the State of Israel, here's a little refresher from Middle East Eye's YouTube channel.
It's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
The second part is people should understand by now, this should be crystal clear, that Israel is the single greatest strength America has in the Middle East. I always say to my friends when they say those things to you, I say, imagine our circumstance in the world were there no Israel. How many battleships would there be? How many troops would be stationed? You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Progress occurs in the Middle East when everyone knows there's simply no space between the United States and Israel. There is no space between the United States and Israel when it comes to Israel's security. There is only one nation in the world that has unequivocally, without hesitation, and consistently confronted the efforts to delegitimize Israel. At every point in our administration, at every juncture, we've stood up on behalf of legitimacy of the State of Israel.
The security of Israel and the United States is inextricably tied, and we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel out of our own self-interest.
In my last Israel-Gaza episode, I linked to an article by Alan McLeod, senior staff writer at Mint Press News. His article lists the top 10 U.S. politicians receiving Israel lobby cash. And take a guess who's at the top of that list. That's right. Genocide Joe. I'll just share a blurb. From the beginning of his political career, Biden, according to his biographer Branko Marcetic, established himself as an implacable friend of Israel, spending his Senate career showering Israel with unquestioning support, even when its behavior elicited bipartisan outrage. The future president was a key figure in securing record sums of U.S. aid to the Jewish state and helped block a 1998 peace proposal with Palestine. The support for Israeli policies has continued into the present, with his administration insisting that there are no red lines that it could cross that would cause it to lose American support. In essence, Biden has given Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a carte blanche to break any rules, norms, or laws he wishes to. Of course, I'll link to that article again in the show notes, but if you just don't have time to read it, let me just quickly run down the list of the other 9. And these are U.S. politicians who have taken the most Israel lobby money since 1990. At number 2, we have Robert Menendez receiving around $2.5 million. Number 3, Mitch McConnell, almost $2 million. Number 4, Chuck Schumer, $1.7 million. Number 5, Steny Hoyer, $1.6 million. Number 6, Ted Cruz, $1.3 million. Number 7, Ron Wyden, also with about $1.3 million. Number 8, Dick Durbin, $1.1 million. Number 9, Josh Gottheimer, $1.1 million. And number 10, Shontel Brown, received just over $1 million. Now remember that these are both Democrats and Republicans, just so you don't think I'm unfairly targeting Democrats. And this raises a huge question in my mind, this being an election year. Is it even possible for U.S. voters to vote against Israel and its bloody mission? Is it possible to have a U.S. president that AIPAC doesn't handpick? AIPAC, of course, being the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. These are seriously troubling questions. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a U.S. president who didn't give Israel just about everything it wanted. I'd love to be wrong about this, of course, but I don't think I am. Lord help us in this next election. Rest in peace, Aaron Bushnell. You will not be forgotten. Free Palestine. Curious Naked Diatribes is a production of Javi Media. New episodes first and third Tuesdays. You can get in touch through info@javimedia.net. Javi Media.